Record. Okay, almost done. Now I'm going to bring up my slides again. Okay. Okay, did it. Thank you, everybody. Yes, one other thing.
You can minimize your video if you don't want your.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good call. I didn't realize, I hadn't even noticed I was on the screen. Make it go away. Oh, yes. Oh, okay. All right, so my name is Tracy Brown. I am the president of Riverkeeper. I also have the title Hudson Riverkeeper, a lovely honorific. Thank you everyone for coming out tonight to spend some time together and talk about the Hudson River and this focused topic of deluge or drought, looking at the future of the Hudson Valley through climate impacts. So I'm going to go through a series of slides, starting with one of my favorite images of all time. God bless the photographer who was in the right place at the right time, getting this whale breaching in the Hudson near New York City. So I'm going to just do a little overview of Riverkeeper's priorities for this coming year. I'm going to give you some facts about the climate impacts that we're seeing within our region. And then, you know, it's such a huge topic. So this is not going to be encyclopedic about Riverkeeper's work or about climate. I just picked a slice that I thought could be interesting for tonight for the time we have. So I'm going to talk about the impact of these changes on our waterways and wildlife, and then the waterfront communities and our drinking water. And then we'll open it up for questions. And I'm happy to answer questions about anything in the Riverkeeper portfolio that you wanted to hear about that I don't cover. So Riverkeeper's mission is to protect and restore the Hudson River from source to sea and safeguard drinking water supplies through advocacy rooted in community partnership, science, and law. And I think you're all familiar with our beautiful Hudson River estuary. The tidal estuary, this lower section where the tide influences felt, is about 153 miles. That's a super productive ecosystem. Estuaries are actually the most productive ecosystem on the planet. And then it continues north of the federal dam system here up into the Adirondack region. The Hudson River really is kind of what defines, like, we're all here because of the Hudson River. Like, this is what made New York, New York. And we take everything from the river. So it provides transportation, energy, food, commerce, recreation, inspiration, as we famously know, so many art movements inspired by and happening in the valley. And then not everybody knows drinking water. There are about 100,000 residents that take their drinking water from the Hudson River, including Kingston, Poughkeepsie, Lloyd, communities in this area around here. So Riverkeeper's priorities, there is a lot of work, but we kind of narrow them into these 4 buckets. Our kind of core and historic founding work is improving water quality. So that's really the pollution, the water pollution work. And along with that, as we address water pollution, we can get people back to the river. So reopening beaches, increasing public access. We also have been working on drinking water, safeguarding drinking water for a long time. And that really started with the New York City drinking water supply further up in the watershed, but we are increasingly getting more involved in local drinking water sources, local reservoirs as well. That's an expanding part of our work. Then, of course, more recent mitigation and adaptation for climate change. That is just a must because we are in the climate crisis and the change is happening and we need to be adapting and mitigating. We'll talk more about that tonight. And then restoring the habitats for wildlife, because if we weren't so focused on the climate crisis, the big topic we'd all be talking about is the mass loss of life and biodiversity that we are also experiencing right now. So kind of one of our distinguishing characteristics as an organization is that we have all of these subject matter experts. So we have lawyers and scientists and community organizers all working together. And we have a lot of tools in our toolkit. So we do the defensive work on pollution and government accountability and polluter accountability. We do the restoration work, getting into the ecosystem and taking out the dams and planting and bringing back damaged parts of the environment. And then, of course, bringing the public in, because it's all about you guys and how many of you we can collaborate with and how many ways to scale up the work that we're trying to do. So the topic tonight, climate. So water is the primary medium through which we will feel the effects of climate change. That is a true statement, and just want to put that out there. And then on the data side, New York is experiencing the changes from climate on a rate that is above the national and global average. And not everybody realizes this, that the way that you experience climate change, both in terms of heat and sea level rise, rain, whatever all the manifestations are, largely through water, it varies a lot. It is not the same for everybody. So I have some stats for what we're experiencing in this metro region. So this is looking at what I would call like our lifetimes. I have other slides for our children's lifetimes and our grandchildren's lifetimes, but I didn't have the heart to bring those tonight. I'm just taking us out to 2050. So, and this is on a continuum. We're already seeing increases. So this is just the going forward, another up to 6 degree temperature rise. Six-fold increase in frequency of heat waves, I think, is another meaningful way to think about the heating. Precipitation up to 11% increase, and sea level rise up to 19 inches, but very quickly exceeding that in the coming years. So not everybody knows this, but New York, our New York region in New York City, has been reclassified as subtropical. We were a temperate forest before, and now we're subtropical. So deluge and drought, this is what we are experiencing. So the heat goes up. We experienced some of our first wildfires this past summer and a couple summers ago. So that was a new experience for folks who aren't from the West Coast. And then we have the deluge. I think we've all have very recent memories of these heavy rain events, and this is going to continue in intensity and frequency. And then the drought. So we had some drought this summer, when then it goes to drying up, and that leads to water scarcity and inundation. So that's just the rising sea levels, the rising groundwater. And there are knock-on effects from all of these changes that we are in the midst of now. So to kind of bring it, I really tried to bring it into some bite-sized, somewhat actionable things, so we don't get too overwhelmed tonight. The wildlife and the waterway impact. So these are some beautiful river herring. This is a shot of the river. So what we see with the impacts that I just mentioned, the heat, the deluge, and the drought, we're seeing increased levels of eutrophication. This is low oxygen in the waterways. That makes it hard for fish to thrive. Fish need oxygen just like humans need oxygen. So having oxygen in the water is really important to support life. Increased algal blooms. So the algal blooms grow because of the heat, and also the cycles of more nutrients that will feed them getting into the waterways when it rains can also trigger more algal blooms. We don't have as many algal blooms as places like the Sound, where you have a lot of these little bays and harbors, because the moving nature of the river suppresses the algal blooms. We actually have a very nutrient-rich river, but because of the motion, they don't get to take hold that much, but you see them in quiet places and smaller tributaries, and they are increasing. And obviously ponds and lakes for any pond and lake people. We're seeing increased ocean acidification, and I put that in quotes because that's one of those things that got misnamed really early and just has led to a lot of confusion, because the acidification, which leads to higher pH levels in the water that make it harder for shellfish to create shells, and other impacts. It's also bad for coral. It actually happens more in estuaries than it does in the open ocean. The estuaries are more susceptible to acidification. So we're seeing more of that. And then dam failures. So for people who've been following Riverkeeper, we've recently stood up at what we call the dam movement, where we're trying to remove all of these abandoned dams within the estuary. We have over 2,000 abandoned dams, and because we're getting heavy rain events, they're under more pressure than really they were engineered to withstand. So they're old, and now they're getting heavier rain events than they're designed for. So we're at a greater risk of dam failure. And then we're seeing the decline in marine life and loss of viable habitat. And one thing I read recently that was so interesting about marine life is that, I forget the scientific term, you probably know it, where there is kind of a chain of events of the life of an animal. So one example would be like the monarch butterfly, that the monarch butterfly is cued by weather when to fly south. And that timing of flying south is like perfectly timed for the milkweed, and then the this thing and the that thing for the whole life cycle. And once you change those things, an example we have here is the striped bass. So the striped bass are one of our beloved iconic Hudson River fish. And the striped bass, the young striped bass, are great at eating fast swimming bait fish like herring and menhaden. But the older, more mature striped bass tend to eat the slower fish, crustaceans. They eat lobsters and they eat clams. But now the lobsters are disappearing because the heat wave, the water warming. So our striped bass are here, but the lobsters aren't here. And so then the striped bass, the older striped bass aren't living as long, not as much spawning and reproducing. And then you start to see all these effects that we're just learning as we experience them in real time.
I'll just say that a lot of these things have happened in Irvington this summer. We had a big algae bloom in Halsey Pond and a big fish die off. And what was the other thing you had underneath that? It had the, oh yeah. And the dam is
You got a failing
reaching
dam?
its capacity.
All right, well, we should talk about that.
It's going to be a very,
We can help you take out your dam. I have people who do that.
Well, it's nothing but houses down from the dam. It's the reservoir. It's not.
Oh, well then, those are the one kinds of dams that we like. Reservoirs, dams for drinking water. Yes, yes.
It's not for drinking water, it's for old reservoir.
Yeah, yeah, okay, we'll talk. So some of the things that we're doing and that you all can do too. So I'm going to talk about actions, but with Riverkeeper examples, but also communities, and in some cases, individual residents, especially if you're a property owner, can take some action. So most important, like such an obvious thing that people almost don't even say it, just stop building. Just protect what we have. This is the low hanging fruit. And it so often gets missed. We have situations like on the Pecanico Lake in Sleepy Hollow, where I live. A developer came in and bought up a whole bunch of land and is now going to put in like a multi-unit condo in a place where people have been walking and it's forested space and there's a beautiful pond to swim in. And when it happened, the local residents kind of said, "What? That was for sale? Like, why didn't we know? We could have bought this land and put it in some kind of a conservation." And now they want to try and buy it back from the developer who's got dollar signs and, TBD, there's probably going to be a big development there. So you got to look at what we have that where you see undeveloped land, find out who owns it, try and buy that land. Yes.
Is that the Zappy project you're talking about?
Yes.
Is Riverkeeper involved in opposing that?
Yes, so we submitted comments. We did comments about the impact to that backup drinking water reservoir and, kind of did the research of all the pieces we can find within the law to try and stop or minimize the size of that development. Yes, MJ.
I was just one of the things they reported is that when they really did a look at the science, did an analysis, 30% of climate change is caused by land disturbance.
Wow.
Which include development, include building. But it also includes things like, the dragnet fishing.
Yeah.
Disturbing the ocean surface.
Sure, yeah.
And including industrialized farming, which they also include with land disturbance.
Yeah. And we had a great goal, the federal 30 by 30 goal, which probably people know about 30 by 30, and we also passed the state level version. So 30 by 30 was a federal goal to say by 2030, we're going to have in some kind of protective status, 30% of terrestrial land in the US and 30% of marine submerged lands in the US. And the Biden administration was working on that. I'm sure it's probably revoked already. I can't keep up with the executive orders, but we did also pass a New York 30 by 30 So that is an important goal. Riverkeeper has also been really instrumental in getting better wetland protection. We only had state protection of wetlands that were 12 acres or larger, which is so large when you think about, especially an area so developed like where we all live here in Westchester. So we, after many years of, trying to get through different parts of the legislature and even getting one version to the governor that she vetoed, we finally got one through that reduced it down to 7 acres in the last session. And now we're working on the regulations for that.
Is that swamp milkweed in that photo?
looks like it. You tell me. Okay, so another thing that's really important, obviously, around the deluge part in particular is managing our stormwater. And I put that in quotes because stormwater, technically, it's not just rain, it's rain that's hit the land and picked up some garbage, and then that makes it stormwater. Rain is great, and rain you want to have recharged right back into the water wherever you can. Stormwater you want recharged. Sometimes it needs to be treated depending on where it comes from. But you're probably all familiar with green infrastructure. Green infrastructure is just using biomimicry and kind of nature-based technology to capture the rain where it falls and get it right back in the ground. And popular examples are curb plantings. If you're on a pond or a lake or a river or the waterfront, having plantings right down to the water. This strategy is more about cleaning stormwater, that when there's water coming off the landscape before it gets into a pond, if you don't want to have algal blooms, you want to have plantings, you want to have a river buffer as a strategy for cleaning your water naturally before it returns to a river or a stream. And then there's strategy number 2, the gray infrastructure. So gray infrastructure is also needed. We're always promoting, look at green infrastructure strategies first, but there are definitely roles for drains and pumps when we have hard surfaces to go with a porous pavement. And then there's tremendous need in New York to upgrade our wastewater treatment plants and our drinking water plants. We have a new coalition in Westchester, I'm happy to talk about later, the Coalition for Clean Water, that is just focused on Westchester's aging sewage infrastructure and trying to get investments and improvements because it's really very old and it's underground and neglected. And it shows up in closed beach days and all kinds of pollution in our community. So then the other thing that we can do in this universe of helping the wildlife and our natural habitats, our waterways, is restoring the rivers. Obviously we're in a very built area, so going back where we can. This is everything from, we have this annual cleanup that now we offer year round. We do it in Irvington. I think we have 2 sweep leaders who organize a Riverkeeper sweep in Irvington. It is the first Saturday in May this year, which I think is May 3rd, I'm gonna guess, looking at Adam. So please sign up if you haven't done this. This is a great way to meet other people, whatever community you live in. We have sweeps all over the valley, and it's a great way to get out and meet people. And then this is kind of the light touch, and then the heavy touch, I mentioned the dams, May 3rd. So there are over 2,000 abandoned dams in Hudson River tributaries. So if you can imagine, so this is old industry. These are mill dams when people were damming the river to spin wheels and do things like make paper and make, textiles and all those things. So if you imagine what it would be like if we move forward from fossil fuels and everyone just walks away from the gas stations and just leaves them to rot in place for 100 years in our communities. That is what we've done in the rivers. We built this infrastructure and then we just walked away and it's just rotting there. And that those dams are blocking the fish from getting into their natal streams, the cold water streams where they need to be to spawn and reproduce, and directly contributing to a really dramatic decline of marine life that we've been seeing in the Hudson. The other big killer of Hudson River fish was the Indian Point nuclear plant, which pulled the Hudson in to cool its nuclear towers every day and was a major destroyer of marine life. These dams are probably the other second biggest one, you know, and pollution. I think pollution also is hugely detrimental to the fish.
And how far inland from the river do you think these dams are? Does it vary from one township to another?
It varies, it varies how densely packed they are. So one place where we have a lot of attention right now for our dam removal effort is on the Quissayoc Creek, which runs from the Hudson up into Newburgh and other communities north of Newburgh. In that community, the first dam is, you know, like a couple hundred yards from the mouth of the river, and then there's another dam about every half mile. And the dams, getting dams out in New York State is very expensive because behind them is all this contaminated sediment. So all the dams were used for some local, for every dam, there was a mill or a business that was just discharging whatever the effluent, whatever the byproduct of their industry was. So to take out each dam, you have to sample the sediment, you have to have a sediment remediation plan, and then you have to physically get in with the trucks eventually and break them down and then restore the area. So it's quite expensive. The work that we're doing with this, we get a bunch of support from the state for the planning and the measuring of the sediments, but it's a multi-million-dollar endeavor to do the removal, and we've been getting federal grants. We just finally started getting federal grants from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation and NOAA, and now that's at risk. So, yes, Anne.
Are you running into opposition from private property owners who have used the dam area
To make ponds and lakes. Yeah, so some of the dams are like someone's little lake or even a village's lake and are beloved. So it's a process, it's an educational process, and to make people realize, especially if they're used to a certain duck pond, that actually having a free-flowing stream can be just as beautiful and magical, if not more, than having a duck pond that maybe has an algal bloom in it, a lot of goose poop. So yeah, it's a whole process. So part of what the team does is a lot of education and outreach. And we have to get an approval if it's from the owner. So some of them we want to take out and we just can't get the approvals, and we're working on them. But once people know what the risk is of collapse, and that if they have a failure of the dam, that they're personally liable. And the ones in Quissayoc Creek are actually putting whole neighborhoods at risk, and some of them are very degraded. So there is like a threat to human life in some of the dams that we are currently working to remove. So that, you know, there's a lot of different circumstances. Yes. Yes, and that could be a fun thing to bring out, the map. And just to keep moving, so we also do a lot of enforcement of laws and regulations. So the laws that we have are only as good as the fact that they're actually enforced. The Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act are particularly genius in their structure in that they identify clean air and clean water as a public good and those resources as the public commons. So as citizens, we all have an interest in clean water and clean air, and we can bring what we call citizen suits. So Riverkeeper uses the citizen suit of the Clean Water Act to bring most of our lawsuits. And we can only bring them when the regulating entity, if it's EPA or New York State or New York City, isn't enforcing the laws, then there's an opening for a citizen to come in. And I'll say one more thing on this. In order to bring our lawsuits against polluters, we actually need members who live in that area who are willing to sign on as our, I forget the term of art. It's a
Technically a witness?
yeah, like it's like defendant, plaintiff, I forget, but we really need members. So if you all, you know, Adam's here, we have some documents like to sign up as members and let us know where you actually live. Then when we find polluters in your community, we could reach out and say, would you be willing to put your name on the case? It doesn't cost you any money. You just have to be the person who says, I live here and therefore I'm negatively impacted by this bus company, you know, dumping its stormwater in my local stream.
So, you must be a damaged party in order to have that
Yes.
status to sue.
Yes.
Show cause.
You have to show cause. Yes, that's it. Yes.
Also, most people to join in one of these suits if if you're going to be a party that is one of the show, but you're going to be deposed and it's this whole big process and everything like that. It's actually not. 99.999% of the time, all we need is just a quick statement from you, and that is enough to show it. So if you're thinking that it's going to be something where you're going to be dragged up to Albany and have to do all this kind of stuff, that is not actually the case. It's actually a very quick and easy thing that can help us out.
Nice.
And most of the defendants settle, usually when we're suing someone, it's because they've very clearly violated a permit or a law. So most of them settle and don't actually go to court. And when we have those settlements, sometimes we get an environmental benefit payment that we then reinvest in communities to do projects that address the harm. So it's another benefit. Okay, so topic 3. So I have 3, right? So we did the rivers and the wildlife. So coastal impacts, waterfront communities. This is actually Kingston, and I like this example because this is Rondout Creek. This isn't the Atlantic Ocean. This is just a tributary of the Hudson, flooded and inundating this stretch of business along the creek. This is the Rockaways from Superstorm Sandy. So I think we're pretty familiar with what's happening on our waterfronts. We're losing coastal lands, we're losing habitat, we're losing property, infrastructure, and I put this in there as an impact that I think is coming soon. I put strategic, so I'm kind of questioning myself here, but relocating communities. So communities have been displaced. It hasn't been as strategic as it should be, and we need to move towards more strategic, preemptive relocating of communities. This was a topic when I took the role of president 3 years ago, and I met with the DEP commissioner of New York City, and we were talking about climate impacts and planning for coastal inundation in the city. And I said to him, you have to get a strategic relocation plan going. You have to start now and be offering buyouts for people and building housing in safe areas. And he said, oh no, no one's willing to have that conversation. No one wants to talk about that. The only way it happens is like right after a disaster, then some people will sell their houses. I said, well, I think you're wrong. And I think that's just exploiting people to wait till they're in that position, and you need to start being more forthcoming. And I will say 3 years later, New York City just published strategic retreat and have just started to study and proactively look at this. And they're also doing an assessment of safe rebuild areas to relocate whole communities. So it's starting to be something. It was a third rail, and now we're taking it more seriously. So that is progress. Okay, so some of what we do around this stuff, this is more like big system level stuff. We're not architects and builders. We're not Habitat for Humanity, or we're not out building houses, but we are doing a lot of work on state, federal plans and laws. So this is just one picture. I picked Congressman Goldman because he works with us a lot on the Army Corps' plan for New York City. The Army Corps has been working for years now to get a big investment in seawalls and gates in New York City in response to Superstorm Sandy. So we came out when that plan first came out in opposition, because we don't think that you can just build a wall and block off a waterway and problem solved. We're all going to live in a bathtub and nothing bad's going to happen. So we have done a lot of lobbying promoting holistic planning, meaning you can't just fix for a storm surge, which is what the Army Corps was saying. They were like, Sandy happened, so then what would we want to do when Sandy happens again? None of these storms look the same. You could have a Sandy that comes up and brings all this inland. The flooding could come from upriver, like it did with Ida. The flooding could be mostly rain. The flooding could be inundation and coastal. So anyhow, working with the Corps successfully, I might add, to get them to shift their plan to be holistic, looking at all types of flooding, to put a cost in their cost benefit analysis, which they were not doing before. It was just a straight real estate cost benefit analysis. Like if we put a wall here, if we put walls around Wall Street, that's the most valuable real estate, best return on investment. We're going to put a wall around Wall Street, and like Southern Brooklyn's going to drown. because the return on investment based on real estate is bad for Brooklyn, it's good for Manhattan. So we got them to, through revising the enabling federal law, to say they have to also look at the value of ecosystems and wildlife, what we call ecosystem services, and to prioritize low income and low mobility communities. And also to be willing to look at what they could do with nature-based infrastructure first, and then layering the gray infrastructure second. So I will say this is an area where definitely the new administration is really, we're in a very tentative moment now. We made really good progress. We had 2 rounds of this federal law that tells the Army Corps what to do, the Water Resources Development Act, modifying it. And the Army Corps was just ready to update the plan to address these new federal mandates in the law. And now with Trump in office, what happened last time? So there was Superstorm Sandy, and then we had Trump, and he pulled the funding for the study. And that was when he had the famous tweets, New York, get out your mops and buckets. That was when he defunded this study. And then Biden came in and he refunded it. And we got this stupid plan. Again, they just took the old plan and we're like, here, walls and gates. So for 4 years, we've worked on trying to get a better plan, but now Trump is back. So he may just defund this, and we may be waiting for 4 more years. And I can tell you that New York City, our friends who work in the Department of Environmental Protection are anticipating defunding, and they're starting to do their own planning around how to get alternative funding sources through fees and taxes to try and keep their resiliency work going. But it's kind of a scary moment on that front. So number 3, drinking water impacts. So drinking water impacts from climate. Increased salinity. So we're going to have saltier water in the Hudson. The salt wedge, what we call kind of the front end edge of where salt water moves up the river, it's going to shift further northward. And so there's a good chance that it's going to get to those communities that are drinking from the Hudson River. And then you're at a whole nother level of energy and technology required to do desalinization. We are seeing saltwater intrusion coming through folks who get their drinking water from aquifers. Like Long Island has a big sole source aquifer that's getting saltier. We also are measuring a lot more salt impact from road salts. That's really contaminating and driving saltiness in the water. And we're working on a report right now because we have had some interns work with us and have confirmed that people's drinking water supplies, a lot of the reservoirs in the Hudson Valley right now exceed the health recommendation for people who are supposed to have low salt diets, because so much of the road salts are getting in. And some of that is rain getting into the salt sheds, and the salt sheds being in the floodplains, and us using too much salt. And so that's a whole area of work to be done. And then a new thing that I just learned about, because we just hired an amazing scientist who's a drinking water specialist, Shannon Roback, who worked for years in UC Irvine. So she's a drinking water specialist from Southern California. She informed us when the wildfires were happening near the watershed that there's actually quite a bit of pollution that will be released in wildfires and contaminate surface drinking water reservoirs. So this is a new worry and threat about needing to do serious fire management within our surface watersheds. And for you guys, so you're all drinking out of New York City's drinking water supply here. So we're all lucky, me too, and Sleepy Hollow. So these reservoirs I'm talking about are the ones that we're all drinking from down here. And then with the drought and the deluge, we get more turbidity. And that's another thing that reduces the quality of the drinking water and can trigger the need for more infrastructure and cost. Because you're getting runoff from the landscape, you're getting runoff as the water goes up and down and turns up water in the system. And then, of course, the droughts make a lack of reliability of availability. So what are we doing, and what can you all do on the drinking water front? So we have been leaning into really making sure that people know where their drinking water comes from. A lot of people don't know where their drinking water comes from. We are currently working on a an open source water quality data portal that will actually map out for everyone in the valley where their water comes from, with links to their drinking water report, with translation of how to understand what that means in your drinking water report. So it's numbers, but it actually will provide some thresholds and some context. So we're really trying to raise drinking water literacy so people can understand better what is the quality of their drinking water, where is it coming from, and what are the threats. And I'll tell you a funny little story about this. So we've been involved in passing supporting development of local drinking water source protection plans. So we've worked very hard to get these drinking water source protection plans in place and working with communities to implement them. And one of the communities we work with is Peekskill, and Peekskill has a reservoir, and then they have a little brook that flows from the reservoir, and then they have their treatment plant. And for all the years, they thought that they had to protect the reservoir because that was their drinking water source. And the brook, Peekskill Hollow Brook, goes by the Taconic and over all these roads, and they didn't really focus on the brook. And we started sampling with students, like this picture of students we worked with. This is from up around Troy. And they discovered that like 90% of the time, they're actually drinking the brook. That they're not pulling enough volume, that they're actually drinking from the reservoir. They're drinking from the brook. And they were doing nothing to protect the brook, which is getting the road salts and the runoff and all this other stuff. So this is the type of stuff we're working on. We got really involved with this, honestly, from discovering the PFAS contamination in Newburgh years ago. And that really kind of woke us up to, oh my God, it's not only the big reservoirs that nurture half the state, but there's all these little reservoirs that are vulnerable and people don't even know where their drinking water is coming from. So I think this is a big emerging area. I think it's going to take more of our resources, and I think the communities need to be more engaged in really understanding. And I think we've been taking drinking water for granted. And it's one of those things you just assume the invisible hand of God, aka the national government, is doing for you, and they're just not to the degree that we need them to. So that's a big takeaway for me tonight, is focus on that. Enforcing laws is a part of the drinking water work, and then working for new protections, things like PFAS and new contaminants. When we discover them, when the PFAS was discovered in Newburgh, it wasn't even a regulated contaminant. So we can say, oh my God, it's polluted with PFAS. And then the state says, okay, but that's not on our list. And then you have to fight to get it on the list. And then it's on the list. And then, okay, well, what's the acceptable level? And then you have to go to a rulemaking process and get them to set a level. And then, okay, now we have a level. Now we can talk about what a cleanup would look like to get to that level. So New York did that work and led on that. And then the federal government followed, and the federal government then passed their own PFAS criteria, which was actually more protective than ours, but Trump already threw it out. So he got rid of the federal one. That was one of his day one actions, but we still have New York's. So this is where being active on the state level is so important. And I'm almost done. I think this is one of my last slides now. Other things around drinking water. So this is one of the reservoirs upstate. This is the Ashokan Reservoir, and a big tributating plume coming out of the Ashokan into the Esopus Creek for any of the upstate people. And so also managing New York State's reservoirs and how they impact local communities is a whole nother thing. There's the drinking water, but then there's also, are they being good neighbors? There's a lot of history there. And we are in an agreement with the city to be a watchdog over how they manage those reservoirs. So that's our drinking water watershed watchdog role. And these are just areas of research that we're looking at right now and talking to the city in terms of the future of that watershed and new vulnerabilities, and them needing to kind of do a fresh look at what business as usual, because we're not in circumstance as usual. So operations and maintenance needs to be assessed and updated. And with that, I'll just wrap it up by saying, you know, as you could see, we're doing a lot of local work, and we're also looking at the systemic influences that get to these problems, and doing the lobbying and the legislative and the legal work to try and support action on the ground. And we're not able to show up for every development and things people aren't happy with, but we're trying to create the climate in which people have the right tools and information and laws, so that you can also be water protectors alongside us. And that's how it gets done. That's how we keep clean water. That's it. So Indian Point is fully decommissioned and we now have like no threat of any of the kind of accidental radioactive major catastrophic vulnerability. Both of the reactors are shut down. So we're at the point now where it's about securing the site and securing what's left on the site. So the last thing that you'll remember is there's the tritiated wastewater that was left on the site, and Holtec, the company that is charged with decommissioning, wanted to just dump that in the river. And we had a big campaign with a lot of other partners. It was a big groundswell of people kind of saying, are you kidding me? Like, we can't even believe this is a thing. We got a law passed. It was really hard to get Governor Hochul to sign it. So hard. It's the Save the Hudson Act. So the Save the Hudson Act, we started out trying to get a state law that said you can't dump radioactive materials into waters in New York State. But apparently hospitals do this. Some of the hospitals discharge radioactive materials. So, and there's at least one other nuclear power plant that dumps tritiated wastewater. So we had to shrink it down to just, you can't do it in the Hudson. And just barely got that over with so much pressure, but we did get it done. And then Holtec is suing, saying that it's an overreach. Because basically the short version is that the nuclear industry is totally federally regulated. The states have no say if you have an operating nuclear power plant in your community. States have zero say, but because this plant was already decommissioned and wasn't functioning that way, we were able to make like this very narrow legal argument that based on this other law that says if a state feels they have direct financial harm from something an industry is doing, that they can take an action even when there's like federal oversight. And so that was like the premise of the law, and they're fighting that in court. And they did do an illegal dumping of the tritiated wastewater after the law was passed. But knowing Holtec, they probably just did it by mistake because they're pretty incompetent. And they do a lot of things that are mistakes there, like violations, like every quarterly meeting, we have a seat, we represent the citizen seat in the decommissioning oversight board. And every meeting there's some violation. Oh, we forgot this thing, or that thing burned, or this thing got out. So, and that was the track record of the plant when it was run by Entergy, just endless, failures to meet standards and do things the right way. So we'll see, they're holding the tritiated water now. If they hold it for 12 years, it loses a full half-life. So, it is degrading and becoming less polluting for the river. Yeah, and then kind of what do they do with the site when it's eventually decommissioned? Now, because we have this law, if it stands up in court, they can't build another nuclear power plant there. Because now we really can't build any on the Hudson because we got that law passed. Yeah.
Are you doing any wider spread work on the permanent outflows and their emissions into the Hudson? But I know you came and tried to help us, and we have not even succeeded in getting signage put up that is clear, let alone stopping it. Or is that just not something? And we don't, I get the reports of when there are overflows. Yeah. And there are no reports from
Sleepy Hollow is not reporting.
Over outflows.
Yeah. So Anne's asking about the permitted discharge of untreated sewage. So in Westchester, on this side, most of the river towns south of Ossining send their wastewater to the Yonkers plant. Yonkers plant's the biggest plant in Westchester County, and that is a combined sewer plant. So this is the old type of technology that we no longer built and haven't for decades, where the stormwater system drains directly to the wastewater treatment plant. So it's getting wastewater from our homes, our toilets and our showers and our dishwashers, et cetera. And then when it rains, it also gets rain in the same pipes. So when you have a system like that, it's called a combined system, you have these overflows when it rains, because the rainwater inundates the plant, the volume becomes too much. And so the plants are designed to bypass treatment and just dump millions and sometimes billions of gallons of untreated sewage each year into the nearby waterways. So in Yonkers, when it rains, untreated sewage is dumped into the Hudson. Then there's all these pipes up along the river, these like emergency bypass pipes that are part of the system. So if in our community, like the Terrytown sewers keep failing, they collapse because the pipes are old and no one takes care of them. And then in order to repair it, they stop the sewer line just north of that, and all the upriver town sewage that wants to go to Yonkers gets bypassed. We have a big pipe at Horan's Landing where all the paddleboarding happens, and they made it into a public access point. And every time there's a sewage break, 500 million gallons of untreated wastewater gets dumped on that beach. And I've been to the mayor many times. And there's another place where we have chronic sewage overflows, surcharging out of a manhole in Sleepy Hollow Manor. So that's why we started the Westchester Coalition for Clean Water. And I think maybe we should do another session sometime with that group, which is, it's like the Bronx River Alliance and Groundworks, and there's a whole bunch of us doing work on that. So we're really committed to elevate that issue, and we want to get the county to take over the sewage pipes and pumps, not just the plants. So we want to consolidate the operations of our sewage infrastructure under county leadership. Right now, each of the towns own the pipes and the pumps, and they do a terrible job. It's like, do you want to get a new crossing guard? Or do you want to go underground with the televised scope and see if your pipe's leaking? Like, what do they choose? You know, do you want a new awning on Village Hall, or do you want to go underground and see if you're, so it's a very bad state of disrepair, and it is a priority. And it's just a long game. It's a long game, but I do need to get back to the mayor and make sure that at least they're reporting.
I love that. We're doing an inter-village River Towns Energy Expo, maybe Earth Day kind of thing. We're still brainstorming it, but this kind of, county, larger regional topic is perfect. So
we brought this up so we got this on the county's radar through the water, when George Latimer came into office, he started the Westchester County Climate Crisis Task Force. And he set up 5 committees with transit, housing, and energy, and there was a water committee, and I co-chaired it with Ryan Palmer from BZAC, and they said, how can we reduce greenhouse gases in our water sector? And we said, stop treating rain and groundwater at the plant and just treat sewage. And so that kind of, you kind of use whatever lens you have at the moment, right? And and most of these things touch on, there's many ways in which they create harm. So we got it going through climate, but it is the reason why the beach is closed when it rains. You're swimming in your poop when it rains, and no one wants to face that reality, but that is the reality.
Miami, people are swimming in their own pool.
Yeah, we swim in our poop, and for a place like Westchester, I mean, if we can't treat our own wastewater, really, who can? It's not like we don't have the technology, it's just priorities. Yeah.
Maybe this is confidential, but I was kind of curious, what authority or what capacity does Riverkeeper have to I guess, combat or correct the invasive species, to my understanding, that are also harming the ecological balance in the Hudson River. I went on a nature walk in Kingston, and I saw some signs showing how I think it was the European water chestnut was just completely choking, creating these structures over top of the surface that were canopying over the small underneath water vegetation, and doing just chain reactions of damage to the fish in and around. Or perhaps another way, are invasive species as big of a priority as some people have been led to think they are in the Hudson River itself?
That's such a good question. I don't think I'm the best qualified person to answer that kind of balance, weighing the balance. I mean, we're at a moment where everything's changing, right? And so this idea of defining what's invasive and what's not invasive, there's a lot of conversation around that. But aquatic invasive species, you have the vegetative ones like the water chestnut, you have the fin fish like round goby, right? We have so many different species, and we have species on the move just because the climate's changing. And so, I think we're trying to get to the point where we're saying, is it invasive if it's like harmful to what is still their native, and is what was their native before still even viable in changing circumstance? But yeah, the water chestnuts are bad, and they need like very kind of labor intensive harvesting right now is the type of work that people are doing to try and keep them at bay. That's not something that we are directly involved in, but it's definitely when we look at potential impacts and trying to keep them out. But to get in the river and physically, hand remove the water chestnuts in Kingston, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, we're not, that's like an AmeriCorps kind of scale thing where you have like a lot of young people that you can like send in and do a mass thing like that. We do some invasive species work through our sweep, but usually it's more terrestrial. So it's fines and things that people can do without being in the water. It's hard to get people in the water. You got the Phragmites.
Especially given what you mentioned about what goes into the water because of industry and.
Yeah. They're looking at, DEC is working, that's kind of a DEC scale type of problem because it's so big. They are currently talking about testing some kind of spraying in Germantown for aquatic invasive species. I think it's the water chestnuts. And so my team is, saying, well, what's kind of in the spraying? When are you doing the spraying? What's its effect on the marine life? So it's all, it's all these balancing of challenges and kind of deciding what's the best return on investment. That's where I have to make the decision as the boss to say, can we really have an impact with the skills and scale we have? So those big landscape things that require lots of people hand removing things, not so much.
Understandable. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Do you have a little bit of insight about the water chestnut thing, having participated with the Cary Institute's Submerged Aquatic Vegetation Study that's been going on for a bunch of years? And we would go out and they do some of it, by like aerial, whatever, drones every few years, but they actually have volunteers every year, examining the aquatic life. And we stopped a few years ago because it's not that fun, but but at the time, what they explained to us about the water chestnuts is that, it's been here 100 whatever years, and apparently it's not increasing overall on the river. It's just moves, where it's not good, of course, I understand that, but we felt somewhat better in that it's not getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Now, I don't know if that's changed with all the climate change, but you may want to just, if you're really curious on the topic, the Cary Institute, there's some large aquatic vegetation study that's been going on for years.
Yeah, so there's a great story about Phragmites and Piermont Pier right across from here. So when they did the Tappan Zee Bridge, they had an environmental benefit fund to be spent on projects to help repair damage done by the construction. And so someone put in a proposal that they should pull the Phragmites out of Piermont Marsh. Well, they started doing it and the whole marsh started to wash away. And then they realized there only is a marsh here now because of the Phragmites. And so people had to say, including us, whoa, 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 stop, like, you're going to lose this entire marsh, which has all these other benefits. Okay, it's only Phragmites that's making it live now, but you still have wildlife, birds and fish. So, yep, it's not cattails, but it still functions.
Do we have zebra mussels concerned about there?
Yeah, so there's some zebra mussels. I say the bigger concern for us in terms of like invasive fish is we used to call them the Asian carp, but the variety of carps, we don't call them Asian carp anymore. I'm sorry, I forget the new name. But there's a variety of carps that we're trying to keep from coming in through the canal system on the Erie Canal, and those would be like devastating in terms of loss of diversity, and they move more than the zebra mussels. So the zebra mussels also are harmful, but they move and spread a lot slower. So I'd say for us, in terms of priority of invasive species, we are trying to get really dramatically change the operations of the Erie Canal, which is pretty much just for recreational boaters now. It's just people who want to be able to go like from the Great Lakes to here because it's fun. It's not really an industrial necessary passageway, and we can stop the cart by making those boats have to be kind of lifted up and put on the other side of the wall instead of letting the water go through. And we know that that is a vector for invasive species from the Great Lakes because that's how the round goby came in.
Also with the zebra mussels, if you get enough of them, it really compromises the infrastructure. It'll
Yeah.
clog, sewage pipes or something like that.
Yeah.
And then also just regarding the Yonkers wastewater treatment plant, this post Superstorm Sandy, it was the wastewater treatment plant that had the largest discharge, the third largest discharge post Hurricane Sandy.
Which one?
The Yonkers plant.
What's
Yeah,
the-
it has a massive volume.
It's built out into the river. It's built out into the tidal estuary. And it was offline for over 20 days.
Yeah. Because all their power infrastructure was on the first floor. So that was back when, before they moved all the generators up, and all that work has now happened. But yeah, we need a big investment in those plants. Yeah.
Can you
Oh, and
say a
then-
bit more about state protected wetlands? What do you have to do to become one, and what benefit is that you get labeled as well?
Yeah, so the state now with this new law, you can automatically get a wetland that is 7 acres or above protected. But then there's also this thing where you could petition for your wetland to be considered significant. So they have a discretionary protection that they can put on different wetlands that are smaller than 7 acres. So that would be, I could follow up with you and get you like an email if you want to reach out to someone
So
at
what happens
DEC.
if you've got in wetland status?
You can't fill the wetland, you have to leave it intact. Because we fill, that's mostly what we do, is we fill wetlands, yeah. Yeah, so you can't fill it. Do you have a question? Yeah.
I was just gonna say that, not sure whether it's the Westchester Parks or the Westchester Parks Foundation, but for the water chestnuts, they have this machine that goes in and pulls things up by the roots, so you don't have to wade in there yourself. Tibbetts Brook, Park is a place where I've seen them do it, and it's amazing.
So Tibbetts Brook, interestingly, is a brook that used to entirely go into the wastewater treatment plant. They treated that brook. Yes, they were just treating that brook, just using that energy and
Fresh
chemicals
water.
and all that, just running that brook through the wastewater treatment plant. They're finally disconnecting it. New York City has a lot of combined sewer systems, and New York City alone discharges over 20 billion gallons of combined sewage and stormwater. So if you filled the Empire State Building with sewage 72 times, that's how much they're dumping a year into the waterways. That's why you can't swim in the waters around New York City. But if they stop doing that, you absolutely could. You're right on the ocean there. I mean, the tidal exchange from the Atlantic is amazing. It could definitely be a city where we were swimming from the shoreline if we just stopped that dumping. Because it is good when it's dry. When it doesn't rain, it gets clean and they do the marathons and all those things.
So, sorry. So our Yonkers, wastewater treatment plant, it sounds like it's ancient. I mean, is the proposal like start from scratch in the same location, or, and can we build even methane? Power plant out of it? You know,
No, I mean, so the county owns the plant, and the county has gotten new plants and has invested in updates to the plant itself. The real problem is, mostly, for the most part, it's on all the pipes, the hundreds of miles of pipes and pumps that aren't owned by the county, and disconnecting the stormwater ones from going into the sewer mains and feeding to the plant. So if we could disconnect the stormwater coming in, we get a lot better performance out of that plant. They are constantly kind of upgrading the plants. The plants, and this is kind of a misperception that people think when there's sewage in the water that it's the plant, but really often it's that the sewage isn't getting to the plant. It's getting out on the way, it's in a stream or a creek, and then it's just flowing in from that tributary.
But that's ripping up all the streets. I mean, that's
Yeah.
network.
Yes,
That's the problem, to
yes,
separate the
yep,
runoff from the sewage means digging up miles of.
Yeah.
You know. it's a
and
big
people don't
deal.
want to do that.
Yeah.
And when my kids were little, I always thought, oh, the little stream in my backyard is cleaner than the Hudson. Like, oh, the dirty Hudson has got the whole, the story of being the Superfund site and how awful and polluted it is. So I would take my kids to Rockefeller State Park and we would play in the Mechanical River. And then I started doing water quality sampling for Riverkeeper. That was the first time I worked at Riverkeeper, was just starting that citizen science work. And then I discovered, oh my God, these little tributary streams and creeks are so much more polluted than the Hudson because they're very low flow. There were all the little storm drains and that have the leaks and the sewers are going into, they're barely diluted at all. And then by the time it gets out to the full river, dilution has a huge impact. And sun, UV disinfects by fecal bacteria. So that was a huge misperception that a lot of people had around the Hudson. We were able to dispel that once we started our water quality monitoring.
Just going back to the dams, the decommissioning of dams, is that, I don't imagine that it's all demolished in like one go, like, because that would ostensibly, with some of these dams, just create a massive surge that would, while it reclaims where the water used to be, the shoreline, the sides now would just get wiped away. I mean, like, what is?
Yeah, you have to let them down. You have to let it down over time. It is a process. I'm not an engineer, so I won't pretend to know much more than that, but it is a process. And you have to have that plan for the sediment if you know there's contaminants. And there was a lot of aversion to removing dams in the Hudson for a long time because the thing that made the Hudson really become the country's largest Superfund site was removing a dam that people didn't know was holding back all those PCBs. So it was a poorly planned dam removal that let all the PCBs in Fort Edwards go and deploy downriver and spread and become this giant Superfund site. So there was a huge backlash, and in the state they didn't want to remove any dams for a long time. And now the criteria of what you have to go through around sediment is pretty onerous and intense, and it makes it very expensive in New York. So when we compete for federal grants, it's very hard because the per mile stream opening to dollar for New York is terrible. Yeah.
I just want to add a little pointer into what I just heard from you. It was a serious thinking. You mentioned about earlier work in analysis of water quality in the centuries and so forth. I think that carries a very important point here. We often talk about clean water, how we see qualitative. Actually, the devil is in the quantity. It is in quantitative analysis. All water polluted. To what degree?
Yeah.
It's the concentration.
Yeah.
The milligrams per liter. That tells us how polluted it is. Okay. So if when we have conversation about anything, if we can really talk on pollution concentration, we earlier mentioned about PFAS and so on. They make no sense if we say there is some, but how much? During what period of time? That's where the conversation makes sense. So I think if nothing else, if your work and someone's work or in coordination can create more dialogue on those terms, in that kind of concept, that's a huge, huge progress in making any joint efforts we need in making real progress in pollution abatement and so forth.
Yeah.
I think that the scientific concept, so fundamental, actually is so vital in terms of getting people working together. I just want to comment on that.
Yes, thank you for that. And yeah, so we have a big citizen science network for anyone who's interested. The water quality monitoring that we do, historically, it's been looking at the fecal bacteria predominantly, but not exclusively. we do it with our own staff from our boat on the Hudson, but all the tributaries, we monitor 14 tributaries, and that's all citizen volunteers. Once a month, we train people, they do the grab sample, and we bring it either to our lab or other labs we partner with. And right now we're expanding that and looking at more parameters, because part of it is also, what are you measuring, right? Are we measuring the right things? Are we asking the right questions? So we started a new water quality consortium with academic institutions in the region and ourselves and the regulators to say, what are the new questions? What are the new things we have to monitor? And one other piece to your point is also it's concentration, and then it's also sometimes combinations, right? So I'm learning more about the drinking water system, and there's something called disinfectant byproducts and precursors to disinfection byproducts. And these are the things that show you different things that are in the water system that then can combine and create new things that on their own, interacting with each other, you know, it might be a precursor, but what makes it become a disinfection byproduct, which is a terrible word. It doesn't sound like it means anything, but it's a way of saying pollution in drinking water. It's got, they got to rebrand it.
Keep track of heavy metals and insecticides and stuff with concentrations and
So-
various waters you measure.
So we don't right now directly measure that, but those are the types of things we'll be looking to expand to. And one of the things we're also interested in is the DNA, the new DNA technology, eDNA, that lets you look at many different things. But we're adding, oh boy, you're gonna test my memory now. I don't know if you care, chlorophyll, and I could go through the list of some of the stuff that we're adding, but.
And to this point, there must be a huge body of information and reference material regarding what constitutes a human pathogen, unsafe level of that, and also same thing with levels of heavy metals and other
Yes.
items like that.
Yeah, so we measure a fecal indicator bacteria that closely tracks with the human gut called Enterococcus. Some people measure E. coli, which less closely tracks the human gut, but then the DNA is the next level where you can really say definitively, like, this is from a mammal, this is not. So that level of technology is getting more affordable, like all of them do over time. When they first rolled it out, it was like $100,000 to get an eDNA lab. Now we're looking at raising money for that. It'd probably be more like in the tens of thousands. And those are really good for if you want to do track down, like if you find a hot spot through the Enterococcus and then say, okay, is this geese? Is it people? You know, what's happening here? And then you can use the eDNA and get more refined. And so, yeah, it's a whole fun world.
Should we give you water samples for you to test in your lab from our teams and everything?
Well, if you join in our sampling thing, yeah, I mean, we have a whole system where I don't think we have a stream in Irvington right now. But we could take your information and talk about it if you have one of interest.
Well, if Charlotte hasn't talked, you know, we have this issue. We have some issues in some of our streams.
Yeah,
We'd be
yeah.
delighted to do that.
yeah. And we also have partners, labs. We work with Curb in Yonkers. They can take some samples too. So yeah, we could talk. Yeah.
Does Sister Brown still have a volunteer water treatment program?
They haven't had that for a long time now. No, sadly. All right, when you're gonna put the hook on me? I don't know how, when you want. Almost 8:30.
If not, we can keep going like this, or we could break into just, you know, it sounds like it's still hands up. I would say
Okay.
good.
Back to George Latimer's now. You got it.
Yep.
Are we gonna communicate with him?
Yeah. Yeah, so we have my team has a relationship with him, and I started working with George when he was a state senator and then the executive and now in Congress. So we're definitely in touch, and I think he's pretty accessible. I think for all of our congressional reps, you know, it's good to be in contact with the regional office. They all have offices here, and you can get to know the people there. I think right now, with everything that's going on, what's getting the most attention in DC is phone calls. I mean, it usually is, you know, there's the hierarchy of how they measure public concern. Visit, like someone actually showed up in my office in DC or regional, that's your highest impact. Phone call, your next highest impact. Personal letter. Group e-blast type of formatted letter petition. So if you really want to be heard, pick up the phone or show up. I think we're in a show up and pick up the phone moment. So I think we should all be doing more of that.
And may I also offer, if you are talking to an elected official, let them emphasize, before you bring up your individual issue, emphasize the importance of a functional government that really serves people, and that you appreciate whatever they're doing in that regard.
Yeah, Turk agrees on that. Did you have a question, Anne?
Yeah, to what degree are you involved with, events like the Mermaids Festival, which has now been scheduled for July 19th?
Yes, we were both there, yes.
And, or working with school districts.
Yeah.
Because we're finding locally that the students, that both the high school students and the lower school students are really getting involved in
Yeah.
issues.
Yeah, so we are definitely, wanting to do more with youth. And I think in my time, this wasn't my first career. I've just been doing the environmental work for about 20 years now, but I've really seen a change in students where you do something with them and it's all about education and training. And now you do work with them and they show up and they have that level and they're kind of like, what's the thing? Let's do the thing. So it's a lot easier to work with students now and you get a better return. So two parts answer to your question. So the Mermaid Festival is a very fun event that we started last year. It was started because we have residents who want to reopen beaches, because in the long arc of the Hudson River health, it has gotten so much better. We have gotten a lot of the sewage out of it, and it's good to swim most places most of the time. Of our data where we're sampling the Hudson, 80% of the samples are beach quality swimming. I swim in the Hudson and Sleepy Hollow every chance I get and anywhere else I can. So you have to, be careful and thoughtful about rain and where you are and not being right at the mouth of a stream, but generally it's great swimming. So we're trying to reopen beaches. We're trying to get people back in the river. That's also something that's needed with the heat and giving people chances to cool off and places to cool off in the heat. So we're trying to reopen the beach at Kingsland Point Park, and the residents who came to Riverkeeper to say, why can't we swim here? Like, what's going on? How do we do this? We said, well, why don't we just kind of introduce people to this closed beach and let them realize that it's here because they've been barricaded off of it, and start to kind of socialize the idea. So I know they always do those swims. All the athletes are like, it's a try, it's a swim across, it's a this and that. They're in the river all the time. So the idea was, let's just do an event that's not athletic, that's just like play in the Hudson event. So that was the idea, to start to socialize that beach. And then these wonderful ladies that we work with were like, let's make it a mermaid festival, which was so brilliant because all these people came and we had an amazing day. And then I want to mention a bigger event we're working on, that the Mermaid Festival is like a little bit of a test case. So we are doing on June 14th, our first annual Riverkeeper fish migration celebration. It is going to be a flotilla of fish puppets and flags and windsocks. We are making the fish visible. We have this Serengeti scale natural event that happens in the Hudson every spring, where thousands of fish come up from the eastern seaboard and come back into the Hudson to spawn in these waterways. Some of them only get as far as the dam and are like, can I get in? And they can't, but there's places for them to spawn. So on June 14th, we are going to have all of these community and artist made puppets and flags and banners. We're starting in the Brooklyn Bridge Park. We're getting on boats. We have boats lined up. We're transforming the boats to look like schools of fish. And then we're going to process up the Hudson from the Atlantic, up along the Hudson River, along all of Manhattan. And we're going to land at, they're restarting the Clearwater Festival called the Hudson Valley Folk Festival. So we'll land at the Folk Festival, but we'll be going by parks. And we're working on curriculum. So schools and community groups who will know it's coming in the months leading up to it, can make, we'll have like art build events where people can come out with their school, they can make their own puppets, they can make their own flags, and then we'll tell them when the procession will go by their community, and people can come out and have their own parties. So we're hoping all the little riverfront towns with parks will like come out and welcome the fish. And then we're gonna try and grow it, and ideally it'll be like a 2 or 3 day event, and we'll get really far up the river eventually, but this is our first year. And so it's a chance to get the kids, we even have some of our puppeteers, like Arm of the Sea wants to do a kind of Punch and Judy introducing the key migratory fish of the Hudson, so they could have an event, they could be like, there's a little burger, and then here's what our shad looks like, and you kind of do a little educating, then people can make their own versions, and then they can come and have fish celebration, right? So my experience in the climate crisis is that I feel like people have turned, and I saw this in the last climate march, where we went from just being like, fix it, like really angry and yelling, to be more like, this is what we want. And there was more wildlife and more kind of imaginative visioning of, this is abundance, and this is safety, and this is cleanliness, and let's like show that and manifest that. So that's what we're leaning into. Yeah, that's what we need. And bringing the artists in, and bringing in the community creativity, we can stitch and bitch this thing together through this administration. And then roll it out. Yeah.
Excellent.
I'd say like just maybe 2 more questions, and then we'll let people chat, and I'll kick you out in about 25 minutes. Here's the book.
And the author's name is Lewis? All right, I don't know if I have that one in my bookshelf. MJ, did you have one?
I think that river parade sounds awesome.
Good.
Are you in touch with all the boat clubs that are down the river?
Well, not on this yet. So I don't want it to get like too big that I have like all these boaters out there. And so I'm kind of trying to keep it, but I know it's going to happen anyhow. I keep saying I'm trying to keep it small. And every time I say that, I'm like, this is already like out of the horse is out of the barn. So no, we haven't invited all the boat clubs yet, MJ, but we could do that.
Even if they just know, so that they can like cheer, they can, you can have
Yeah.
sectional cheering sessions. But also, one of the things is the boat clubs generally open early June. That's after the river speed.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there might be something possible, because like there are people who will go out, and in their boats, they will get some of the coastal areas of the river and clean up.
Yeah.
So has there been any consideration of having like a Riverkeeper sweep part 2, where it asks the boat clubs to see if there's a bigger time they can go and try to get it.
Yeah. We have opened it up so that in addition to just doing the May day, which is like the big day where thousands of people come out, we get thousands of tons of garbage, that people can say, well, I would really like to do it in August, or I would really like to do it in June. So it's a year-round opportunity now. But I think that's a good note that we could bring back to Katie, that maybe we should do an invitation to the boat clubs. One of the ideas for the fish migration celebration too, the ultimate idea is to get to the point where we are using the marine debris from the sweep. We're collecting stuff with the sweep, and then that's the raw materials for making the fish puppets. And we have an artist that we're working with who does that. He makes these gorgeous puppets, and he's making a huge sturgeon for us. And his practice is to use marine debris. And we modeled that at the Mermaid Festival. I don't know if you noticed, he was there and had people making with little squish water bottles. But again, it's like the layers of complexity. We're gonna see how much we can do upcycle and how much we can do recycle.
Festival that day on the waterfront.
That would be great. Yeah. So stay tuned for information on that. We're gonna be doing these art builds so people can come out and make stuff with us and with the artists, and it's gonna be really fun. It's gonna just kind of build over several months. Yeah, so one of our artists in the project is working with the Harbor School in particular, and kind of developing a curriculum with them that then we can bring to other schools. And we work with schools for the sweep, like school groups will show up, scout groups will show up. Sometimes some of our sampling, there's like science teachers who'll get motivated and engage their students in that. Yeah. so there's the Hudson River Day in the fall, which is the State Department of Environmental Conservation offers that. Yeah, so that's a great activity. That's students getting out and sunning. Yeah, yeah. All right. Yeah, thanks, everybody. Morning.